Hey guys, it's Q here, the creator of ICMIZER. Today I'll be recording a new tutorial video. There is an old one available on the website, but it has been around for like a year, and frankly it's not very well structured, and also a lot has changed in ICMIZER since then. So if you are a new player, or you are an experienced player with ICMIZER, but you aren't 100% certain about everything, I think you will benefit from watching this video. With this video I have basically two goals for you guys. The first one is that I wanted to let you know about all of ICMIZER capabilities and features, and to help you understand how it could improve your game and make you a more profitable player. And the second goal is to make sure that after watching this video you will be able to go to ICMIZER and plug in your hand where you have experienced some problem and to find out the correct play with ICMIZER help. ICMIZER is a pre-flop poker tournament analysis tool. It will help sit-and-go players of various structures, heads-up sit-and-go players, MTT sit-and-go players, and MTT players. It will help you in the late phases of tournaments where most plays happen in pre-flop and the actions are usually either all-ins or folds. Let's have a look at one of the simplest tournament spots where ICMIZER can help you. And let's say that we are on the big blind, there are 4 players, and we are facing a push from the small blind. And let's say we assume that he is pushing, for example, 70% of hands. We have plugged in the spot, we hit the calculate button, and ICMIZER provides us with a correct response range for that. We can see that we can call with 13% of hands, and we can see that it has calculated EV for each potential hand we could have, and we can see that green hands are the hands which we should be pushing, or calling all in this case. In order to understand how ICMIZER can improve your poker skills and make you a more profitable player, you need to clearly understand what problem ICMIZER is designed to solve. On the surface, it is very simple. ICMIZER will help you to choose correct decision in a pre-flop spot out of the 2 alternatives, folding your hand or going all in with it. Please note that the all-in decision here could be either an open push by hero, or it could be a call of someone else push, or it could be an overcall of 2 pushes before hero. There can be different actions performed before hero goes into some spot where he needs answer to ICMIZER. There could be some raises, limps, re-raises or pushes in front of us. Let's look at the variables which we need to take into account when we are plugging in a hand into ICMIZER. One of the most important variables is the payout. You can choose payout here in this drop down. Whether you are playing 9 max sit and go, 6 max or some other structure or MTT, you need to choose the correct payout structure which represents your tournament before you perform any calculations, otherwise you will get useless results. Please note that ICMIZER has a wide range of default payout structures, but if you can't find yours in the list, that's okay, because you can create a new one, and that's pretty easy. So ICMIZER will help you in any tournament, even if the tournament is not listed in the default payout list. Note that in some cases you may choose to perform the so-called Chip EV based calculations. In that case you will switch to Chip EV mode. You can notice that the payout structures is gone and you cannot select it now. Chip EV calculations ignore the payout structures completely. So when you want to know how many chips a certain preflop move will be worth for you, ICMIZER doesn't present you the choice of payout structure. Chip EV mode is mostly applicable in heads-up scenarios where the payout becomes irrelevant, or when you are analyzing a cash game pre-flop spot, for example, as a short stack or as a big stack who is having some troubles against some aggressive short stacks who are pushing, and when you want to find out the correct decisions against that kind of players. However, ICMIZER is usually used in cases where we want to take the payout structure into account and when we want to take ICM expected value into account. This would be called sometimes as ICM effect. In almost all cases, because of the ICM effect, our ranges will become tighter than Chip EV based calculation will suggest for the same spot. One thing about Chip EV based calculations is that when you perform them, you will see that the results are displayed as chips. You can see that EVfault is now 2100 chips and push will be 2172 chips. So it would be push is better than fold by 72 chips, so you should be pushing it. When we switch to ICM mode, we can see that the results are presented as a percentage of entire prize pool. So making those kind of adjustments which require as becoming more tight since we are taking into account the payout structure, is the difference between making profitable chip EV based decisions and profitable money based decisions in tournaments, and there is a big difference between the two. Having your decisions aligned with ICM suggestions will have a dramatic effect on your bottom line and ROI. The next variable which we need in order to perform a calculation is the blind level. We can choose the blind level in this drop down, and if you cannot find your blind here, you can also quickly create one. This checkbox can be used when we want to make sure that there is no small blind, which happens sometimes in tournaments. Blinds and antas form the initial pot, and the larger this pot is, the more inclined someone becomes to fight for it, to choose the push decision over the fold. The next important variable is our stacks and stacks of other players, and also the player count. You can quickly edit the stacks and hero position and have them all set up. Our stack can be seen as a certain number of big blinds, and usually we can say that if we have a shorter stack, we become more desperate and have to push more often in order to stay alive in a tournament. However, it is not just about the big blind depth. It is very important for ICM to know how our stack looks compared to the other stacks, or relatively to them. If we have a deep stack, we do not want to collide against other deep stacks, for example, and that would mean much tighter ranges against the other big stacks. However, sometimes even a stack of only 12 blinds, which does sound short, could be considered a big stack if the other remaining players at the table have only got stacks of 4 blinds or less, for example. ICM formula finds our chance to finish at each position, and it takes our stack and stacks of competitors into account to find those probabilities. Converting our stack value in chips to its expected value in dollars is pretty straightforward with ICM. The first step is that we find out our chance to finish at each possible finish position in the tournament, and this is done based solely on the stack sizes of hero and other players. The second step is where we take the payout structure, and we multiply the probability to finish at each position, which we calculated in the first step, on the payout for this position. Then we sum up those multiplied values, and we get the ICM-based dollar expectation for our stack and chips in the tournament. ICM-based decisions often come as a surprise for players, and those surprises usually come from our stack relation to other stacks at the table. I recommend my students to keep an eye on other stacks on the table and understand whether their current stack represents a big stack, medium stack, or a short stack in a specific tournament spot. It is important because each of those stacks categories has a very different tournament strategy, which is especially true in the bubble of a tournament. You need to assign proper bets to recreate a spot which you would like to analyze in ICMIZER. In order to do that, you can use these action buttons next to players. So let's say we want to assign cutoff to push. We choose his fold button, fold action, then we hit all in button, and we can see that now he is all in. We can set his raise here. Let's say he raises to 300, which is 2 blinds. And we would like to find out how we can re-steal against this kind of steal. When we have set up the spot, and we can find out the decision. Editing actions is pretty easy in ICMIZER. You can also reset all actions by using the Reset Bets button, which can be useful sometimes. Once we have all simple elements set, which are the payout, the stack sizes, blinds, number of players, and actions, we get to the most difficult and important part, assigning ranges for our opponents. The next part of the video will cover range assignment in detail. Quality of your calculation and your strategy in the end will heavily depend on your ability to assign precise opponent ranges. In fact, after you understand how to plug a situation in ICMIZER, this will be the only problem you would need to solve in order to get actionable results from ICMIZER. You will first need to understand how many ranges ICMIZER requires to perform a calculation and why. Let's start in Chip EV mode, because in Chip EV we will be asked to provide less ranges, so it will be easier for beginners to understand all those ranges assignment problems. Here we have a 4-way spot where here is in the button, and we are trying to figure out the push range for hero, like open push, Nobody has made any bets. It has been forwarded to us on the button. So now we want to find out the push range. Let's see what ranges we need to plug in here. The push range which we are trying to find is the button range for hero. So when we push, small blind could call us. And here we have small blind calling range. This is it, 22%. And when the small blind calls, there is a chance that big blind will wake up with a hand which he likes, and he may overcall. And his range is marked as overcall, and you can see that this column will represent the overcalls for the cases where the small blind calls. If small blind folds and he is not dealt the range which he will call with, there is a chance that big blind will call with a certain range. Here we can see that if big blind isn't dealt his 22%, small blind isn't dealt his 22% range, then big blind will call our push in 30% of cases. And let's see what this means. It means that we can push 39% of hands. Let's say there is one all-in before hero. Here we are on the button and there is one all-in. And let's say that cutoff pushes, for example, 36% of hands. Here we are calculating hero calling range, and there is, when we call, there is a chance that small blind will overcall with some kind of strong hand, for example, this tight range. And if he is not dealt with overcalling range, there is a chance that big blind will be dealt with range and he will overcall. Note that this is like those three ranges, cutoff push range and small blind overcall range, and big blind overcall range are the only ranges which we need to assign here. Once we have them assigned, we can hit calculate button and we can find out the hero range, which is 21% in this case, when those kind of ranges represent the strategy for our opponents. Let's say the situation is even simpler in terms of number of ranges which we need to provide. When we are facing two pushes from cutoff and button, we just need to provide those two ranges. The first one is the push range for the cutoff, and the second one is the call range for the button. Once we have those two ranges, we can calculate the range for hero, which he can profitably overcall with. Now, these chip EV based calculations are pretty simple compared to ICM based calculations, because when we are in chip EV mode, we really don't care about what will happen when we fold. So our EVfault is always equal to our stack minus the number of chips which we have posted. In this case, it is equal to 2,250 chips minus 300, which is our big blind, which results in 1,950 chips. This is the feature of chip EV based calculations. They are simpler. However, in normal tournament, we cannot be so simple about the EVfault calculations. In normal tournament, when we fold, there is a chance that opponents will collide against each other, and this will improve our tournament equity, because if someone busts, it means that we get a payout jump, and this could be very important when we have a short stack and another short stack busts, for example. Of course, that's a great result for us. And in chip EV, those potential busts of players do not affect us. For example, when you are playing cash game, if somebody doubles up and somebody leaves the table, you don't really get anything added to your stack and your dollars, which is not true in tournament. So let's switch to ICM EV, and we choose a payout structure of 6 max, for example. And let's see what has changed. Here I have moved here to small blind position in order to see that here we are now asked by ICMIZER to provide an overcall range for big blind. If we switch to chip EV mode, we can see that this is not required. Why? Because we really don't care what happens when we fold, as I told before. When we are in ICM mode, we now care about what happens when we fold, so we need to provide a big blind calling range. Because, for example, if big blind calls very wide for some reason, maybe he's like crazy and he wants to go to sleep and he decided to call with entire range, our decision would be very tight compared to his normal overcall range, which is also tight, but this is because of tournament structure. As you can see, it got a little bit wider though. And if he doesn't call at all, maybe we get a little bit more wider. You can see that we are still pretty tight because basically there are 2 pushes before us and we are in a 6 max tournament, so you cannot be very aggressive in this kind of spot. Even though we can call wider than compared to the case where big blind was overcalling with 100% of hands. Now this is the spot where there are 2 pushes before us. Let's switch to a spot when there is a single push before hero. Let's say cutoff folded, and now it's button who pushes. And let's see what happens now. When button pushes, we assign his pushing range here. It's 39% of hands. And this one, which is hero range, we are trying to find, so it has a question mark before we calculate. We need to assign other ranges before we get it. So here we assign big blind's overcalling range. This is all simple. When we fold, however, we need to provide a big blind's calling range against button push range. This is different from Chip EV, where that is not required. Again, this will be used only for hero fold calculation. And again, if for example big blind calls very wide, our decision will be different compared to when he doesn't call so wide. You can see that we become tighter because we like it when players collide in tournaments and not so much in Chip EV based calculations. For example, if hero was on a button and the cutoff would push, it would look a little bit more difficult. We can see that here we have push for cutoff, and we are trying to find hero button call range. If we fold, small blind could call with a certain range, and if small blind calls, once cutoff pushes, big blind could actually overcall. We need to provide that range too. And if small blind folds, then it gets to big blind who can call. And so we need to provide these ranges in order to get good results. Note that you can use the Nash equilibrium feature, which will assign all ranges for you. And this is very handy when you are making calculations, because in some cases there are a lot of ranges which you need to edit. Especially there could be a lot of overcall ranges. And you need to note that after you make the Nash assignment, you need to edit ranges to your understanding of your tournament, because no player will be following those Nash ranges. But for example, overcall ranges could be pretty good. But if you just follow Nash strategy, you will not be making the most money you can. And you can review the Nash equilibrium video about this feature, so I will not be talking too much about this. Here I'm just trying to tell you which ranges you need to edit. Now we have analyzed the spot where there was one all-in before hero. And the most difficult spot in terms of number of ranges is when we are open pushing. Let's say hero is on the button and we are thinking about push. When we push, a small blind could call. And then if he calls, big blind can overcall. If small blind doesn't call, then big blind will call. So here, when we push, small blind will call our push with 10% of hands. If he doesn't call, then the big blind will call our push with 16% of hands. If we fold, however, then it gets to the small blind and he can push. Here we provide the small blind push range, which is 66% of hands. And here we provide the corresponding big blind's calling range against small blind in this column. So this column is related to hero push and calls against him. This column is related to small blind push and calls against him. If we put ourselves on the cutoff, we can see that there is another column. Here we can see that there is a button push range when we fold and the call range against him for small blind and the big blind. And if button folds, there is a push range for small blind and there is a call range for big blind against that range. And here there are 3 ranges for button, which we call as our push. Notice that there are no overcalls here because they can't fit. Overcalls can be found on the overcall ranges tab. As you can see, there are a lot of ranges. In this kind of spot, there can be plenty of ranges if we are even if there are more players and we are on the earlier position. You can see that here we have a lot of ranges, and this is just one tab. There are several tabs. There is hero push tab, there is MP push tab, hijack push tab, cutoff push tab. Sorry, there was a problem. The most important tab is the main ranges tab. I will be describing a simpler scenario with 4 players, because once you understand what's going on, it will be easier to grasp bigger spots. So again, let's get to four-way spot and clearly understand what's going on. Hero can push and there are three players behind him who can call. When hero pushes, if button calls, then small blind can overcall with this range. If button calls but small blind doesn't overcall, then big blind can overcall with this range. If button folds, small blind can call with 12% of hands. If he calls, then big blind can overcall his call, and this overcall range is related to small blind's call range of our push range. On the overcall range for button push, you can see that if button pushes 36% of hands, small blind will call with 15% of hands, and big blind will overcall that with 6% of hands. Again, note that you can use calculate Nash button to assign all those ranges. It may sound like a lot of ranges, but they are all really required. Some ranges are more important than others because some ranges affect your decision more. So you can be spending more time thinking about call ranges than about overcall ranges after you have hit calculate Nash equilibrium, because usually overcall ranges are pretty tight, but call ranges could be different. Some players are very tight and their call ranges will be tighter than Nash suggests, but some players could be wider than Nash suggests, and your understanding of a table and actual situation will be the most important. So if you assume correctly about your ranges, you will find ICMIZER will find the correct decision for the tournament. Note that in some cases it could be very difficult to correctly assign ranges for opponents. And in that cases there is not much you can do basically. You will have to be making some guesses, and maybe you will make a mistake and you won't be able to find that out. But in the majority of cases you will be able to find the correct decision, and that is why you are using ICMIZER in the first place. So I know that this has been difficult, probably. This is one of the most difficult parts about ICMIZER. Even players who have spent a month or two with ICMIZER, sometimes they aren't so 100% certain about those ranges. If you feel like it, you can review this video again, because I'm basically saying it quickly, but everything is correct. So once you understand what's going on, I think it will be very easy for you to understand what ranges you need to provide for ICMIZER to make the decision. Again, the hero range is calculated, and the other ranges are provided by you. So once you have changed some ranges, the hero range will change also. So this is it for now, and I hope you will enjoy this video.